In 1939, the United States was still recovering from the Great Depression. 6 years later, it stood at the center of the world. In 1939, the United States was not a superpower. It was tired, cautious, and still healing from the Great Depression. No one was calling America the center of the world. Not yet. But 6 years later, everything had changed. The global economy, military power, political influence. One single war rewrote America's future. And here's the surprising part. It wasn't just the battles that did it. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories that explain how history shapes the world you live in, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these stories. Now, let's talk about how World War II turned the United States into a superpower. Before World War II, the United States was not trying to lead the world. In many ways, it was trying to avoid it. The memory of World War I was still fresh. More than 100,000 Americans had died in a conflict many believed should never have involved them. When it ended, the country turned inward. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, America focused on itself, on its own economy, on its own borders, on its own problems. Then came the Great Depression. Factories slowed. Banks collapsed. Millions lost their jobs. By the late 1930s, survival mattered more than influence. Global leadership felt distant, unnecessary, even dangerous. Across the Atlantic, Europe was growing unstable. In Asia, war was already spreading. But in the United States, most people believed those conflicts were not their responsibility. Congress passed neutrality laws. Public opinion strongly favored staying out of foreign wars. The idea was simple. If America stayed uninvolved, it could stay safe. The military reflected this mindset. The U.S. Army ranked behind several European powers. Equipment was outdated. Funding was limited. Preparedness was low. America had potential, but it was dormant. Yet beneath the surface, something important was happening. The country still had vast natural resources: oil, steel, coal, land. It had a large population, a growing industrial base, and a culture of mass production that no other nation could match. Assembly lines already existed. Factories already knew how to scale. They just weren't being pushed to their limits. The workforce was there, waiting. There was also another factor: geography. The United States was protected by two oceans. Its cities were untouched by bombs. Its railroads and ports were intact. Its factories had never been shut down by war. At the time, this seemed like luck. Later, it would prove decisive. Still, none of this meant America planned to become a superpower. Leadership was hesitant. The public was divided. The priority was recovery, not dominance. Even as war expanded overseas, the United States remained on the sidelines, watching, supplying limited aid, but staying officially out. This was a nation in waiting, not weak, but restrained, not unimportant, but undecided. The world was about to force a decision, and when it did, everything America had been holding back was about to be released. World War II did not begin as an American war, but long before the United States sent troops overseas, the conflict had already started to change the country. Not with weapons, with orders. As Europe and Asia burned, Allied nations needed supplies: planes, ships, ammunition, food, fuel. And there was only one country with the space, resources, and capacity to produce them at scale: the United States. At first, it was cautious. Aid was framed as support, not involvement. Factories filled contracts while the nation still called itself neutral. But those contracts did something powerful. They woke the industrial giant. Production lines that had slowed during the Depression roared back to life. Idle factories reopened. New ones were built almost overnight. Millions of Americans went back to work. Unemployment fell rapidly. Wages rose. Confidence returned. This was not a temporary boost. It was a transformation. The federal government stepped in on a scale never seen before. It coordinated production, standardized designs, directed resources. Private companies worked side by side with the state. Speed mattered more than profit margins. Efficiency mattered more than tradition. Cars became tanks. Appliances became aircraft parts. Shipyards launched vessels faster than enemies could sink them. The numbers were staggering. By the middle of the war, the United States was producing more military equipment than all Axis powers combined. Not because it was richer, but because it was organized. And something else changed too. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers. Minorities found industrial jobs previously closed to them. Skills spread. Experience accumulated. This was a learning economy. Every factory run made the system better. Every mistake improved the next model. Production became faster, cheaper, and more precise. Meanwhile, the American homeland remained untouched. No cities destroyed. No infrastructure lost. While other nations rebuilt under fire, America built without interruption. And money followed production. The U.S. government borrowed heavily, but it borrowed from its own citizens. War bonds turned civilians into investors. Savings increased, not collapsed. By the time American soldiers entered the war fully, the economic shift was already irreversible. The country was no longer recovering from the Depression. It had left it behind. What began as support became dominance. Factories were no longer just meeting demand. They were defining it. By the end of the war, the United States did not just have the largest military force. It had the most powerful industrial economy in history. And the world was about to realize something. The nation that could supply a global war could shape the peace that followed. When the war finally ended, the fighting stopped, but the damage did not. Across Europe, entire cities were reduced to rubble. Railroads were twisted and broken. Factories lay silent. Ports were destroyed. Power grids barely functioned. In Asia, the situation was no better. Industrial centers were flattened. Transportation networks collapsed. Food shortages became widespread. Nations had won the war, but they had lost the ability to sustain themselves. While much of the world counted ruins, the United States counted capacity. American cities stood intact. Its roads, bridges, and factories had never been bombed. Its workforce was experienced, trained, and ready. Its economy was not rebuilding. It was expanding. This contrast changed everything. During the war, the United States had become the world's primary supplier. After the war, it became the world's only supplier. Europe needed steel. America had it. Asia needed machinery. America produced it. Reconstruction required capital. America controlled it. Gold reserves flowed into the United States throughout the conflict. By 1945, the majority of the world's gold was held in American vaults. The dollar was stable, trusted, available. Other currencies were weak. Inflation was rampant. Confidence was fragile. This imbalance created a new reality. For the first time in history, one nation had both the means to produce and the means to finance global recovery. Trade routes shifted. Shipping lanes centered on American ports. Markets adjusted to American output. Even former rivals depended on American exports to survive. But power was not just economic. With industry intact came influence. With capital came leverage. With stability came leadership. The United States could decide who received aid, when it arrived, and under what conditions. This was not conquest. It was dependence. And it reshaped global relationships without a single shot fired. At home, Americans felt the change. Consumer goods flooded the market. Homes were built. Highways expanded. Living standards rose. The war had created momentum, and peace did not slow it down. While others struggled to stand, America was already moving forward. This moment marked a true turning point. Not when the last battle ended, but when the world looked for recovery and realized there was only one place to turn. The United States was no longer just a participant in global affairs. It had become the center of them. Victory in World War II did not simply end a conflict. It created a vacuum. Empires that had dominated the world for centuries were exhausted. Britain was financially strained. France was weakened and divided. Germany and Japan were defeated and devastated. Someone had to fill the space they left behind. For the first time, the United States stepped forward not as a temporary ally, but as a permanent leader. This shift did not happen by accident. American leaders understood a hard truth. If the world collapsed again, the United States would be pulled back into chaos, whether it wanted to or not. So the goal changed. Stability became strategy. In 1944, before the war had even ended, representatives from dozens of nations met to design a new global system. The result was a financial order centered on the U.S. dollar. The dollar became the world's anchor. Stable, convertible, trusted. American economic strength was no longer just national. It was global. Then came institutions. The United Nations was formed to prevent another world war. Its headquarters would sit on American soil, not by force, by consensus. New financial institutions followed. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. They were designed to stabilize economies, fund reconstruction, and prevent the desperation that had fueled past conflicts. And behind them stood American capital. But leadership also required presence. The United States maintained military forces overseas, not as occupiers, but as guarantors. Bases were established. Alliances were formed. This was a dramatic shift from the past. Before the war, America avoided permanent commitments. After the war, it built them. The message to the world was clear. The United States would not retreat behind its oceans again. With leadership came influence. Trade agreements reflected American priorities. Security policies aligned with American interests. Political systems were shaped, encouraged, and supported. Sometimes gently, sometimes firmly. The country that once feared entanglement now defined the rules of engagement. And for many nations, this leadership brought recovery. Markets stabilized. Currencies strengthened. Reconstruction accelerated. But leadership also carried weight. Decisions made in Washington now echoed across continents. Economic choices affected millions beyond U.S. borders. Military commitments extended far into the future. The United States had gained something unprecedented. Not just power, responsibility. And the world was about to learn that a superpower does not only shape events, it lives with the consequences of shaping them. Becoming a superpower did not end the story. It began a new one. After World War II, the United States stood alone at the top. Its economy was unmatched. Its military presence stretched across the globe. Its influence reached into governments, markets, and institutions worldwide. But power, once achieved, demands maintenance. The world now looked to the United States in moments of crisis, when economies faltered, when conflicts threatened to spread, when alliances were tested. Staying involved was no longer a choice. It was an expectation. This constant engagement reshaped American identity. Defense spending remained high even in peacetime. Military bases became permanent features overseas. Global security depended on American readiness. At home, prosperity continued, but it came with complexity. Economic growth tied the U.S. to distant regions. Decisions made abroad affected jobs, prices, and stability at home. Leadership required balance. Act too little, and instability spread. Act too much, and resentment followed. Every action carried consequences beyond national borders. Over time, the role of global guardian created debate within the United States itself. How much responsibility was too much? How long could one nation carry the weight of global order? And what price would future generations pay? The transformation that began during World War II never truly ended. It evolved. The institutions built in the aftermath still shape international relations. The economic systems created then still influence trade and currency today. The military commitments made in that era continue to define strategy. World War II did not simply elevate the United States. It locked the nation into a role that brings influence, opportunity, and security, and one that demands constant decision-making on a global scale. The world we live in now is a direct result of that moment in history. The question is no longer how the United States became a superpower. The question is how it chooses to use that power. Closing reflection and CTA. History does not end when the war is over. It continues in systems, decisions, and consequences. If you want to understand the forces shaping today's world, you have to look at where modern power truly began. Like this video to support long-form historical storytelling. Subscribe to the channel for more deep explorations into the moments that changed the world. Because understanding history is understanding the present.